Once upon a time, there was a little boy named Flemson. Oh, hi, by the way, this is Brandon Copeland with Bedtime Stories with Brandon Copeland, and I've got Benson here. Okay, that's fine. You don't have to say anything.
Okay.
Alright, now let's start. Once upon a time, there was a boy named Flemson. And Flemson was at his grandma's house, and every time Flemson did a job for grandma, she would give him a piece of candy. And so he got really excited about this, and he started doing all kinds of jobs. First, he had to, some of these jobs were pretty crazy, but first he had to clean up all the puzzle pieces. So he put those in the box, put the lid on, put it back in the shelf, and then he went and told his grandma, "Grandma, I cleaned up the puzzle." And she gave him a little candy, little Werther's Original toffee thing. And then he went downstairs in the basement and he cleaned up all the toys that the other cousins got out and put those away. And he came upstairs and said, "Grandma, I cleaned up all the toys downstairs." And Grandma was very excited, and she gave him another Werther's Original toffee. And Grandma said, "I've got one more job for you, and it's kind of a tough job, but I think you're up for the job." And so he said, "Yeah, of course I want to, especially if I get candy." And Grandma said, "Not only will you get candy, you will get a big hunk of bubble gum, like a big fat chunk of it, all to yourself." And so Flemson was like, "Yeah." So Grandma sat down in a chair in her big, cozy, like lazy boy chair. She took off her shoes and her socks, and she handed Flemson a file, like a little metal file. And she said, "Okay, Flemson, your job is to file the corns off of my feet." Do you know what that means?
No.
Like you get like a little callus on your toe.
Yeah.
Right here, and it just grows and grows and turns into like a big chunk. So Flemson's job was to file off the corns on Grandma's feet. But there was one more thing. Grandma's feet were really old, and she only had 4 toes because her baby toe got smushed when she was a kid, and it got chopped off. And so she only had 4 toes, so she could fit in her shoes right. And so Flemson looked at her feet, and he was kind of like, "Oh, okay." And he started to file, and the little powder, the dust from the corn, was wafting through the air, and it got on his finger. And he thought about it for a minute. He was like, "Oh, shoot." He's like, "Oh, man, this is like Grandma's corn powder. Gross. It's all over my hand." And Grandma looked down at him, and she was like, "Good job, Flemson, you're doing so great. Grandma cannot reach her own feet, so this is very nice for me." And so he felt bad. It was gross and stuff, and he did it, but he definitely didn't enjoy it. And he did both of her feet, and she had long toenails that were kind of curled and yellow, and so he was not happy, but he finished just as fast as he could, and his grandma said, "Good job, Flemson. Now you get your bubble gum." And so she went into her room and opened the drawer and pulled out a big old chunk of bubble gum, like it looked like a golf ball, and it was pink. Flemson was like, "Yes." So he quickly ran out of the room with the bubble gum and started to bite it. He could barely fit the thing in his mouth, but he started to kind of chew on it. And eventually, after, about an hour of kind of gnawing away at it, he was able to get the whole thing in his mouth and chew it. But it caused every muscle in his face he had to use to chew that bubble gum. And he chewed it until it lost all its flavor, but it was delicious, and he loved it. And that night, he fell asleep with that giant chunk of bubble gum in his mouth. And You know, his grandma warned him. She said, "Don't sleep with the bubble gum in your mouth. You'll get it stuck in your hair." But of course, he wasn't listening very well to his grandma. And so he slept with the bubble gum in his mouth. And when he woke up, guess where the bubble gum was?
In his hair.
It was not in his hair. He was actually in his stomach, because while he was asleep, he swallowed the bubble gum.
Oh!
Yeah, so he had a big old chunk of bubble gum in his belly. And he felt fine, but a little weird. And he went downstairs and told his grandma, "Grandma, I accidentally slept with the bubble gum in my mouth and it got into my tummy. I swallowed it." And so his grandma's like, "Well, you better watch out. That stuff can mess with your body." And so what's crazy is that day, his body did feel funny. Really funny. And towards the end of the day, he was watching a show on TV, and it was one of these shows where they tell you to like touch your toes and touch your head. Anyway, so he started to reach down to touch his toes, but you know what was crazy? He could reach like super easy and touch his toes, but he couldn't do that before. And then they said, touch your arms to behind your back, and he reached behind his back and his arms touched piece of cake. And then they said, now this one's really tough. Do the splits on the floor. And Flemson tried to do the splits on the floor. No problem. And then all of a sudden he thought, this is really weird. And he went to stretch his arm up to, like they showed him in the video, and his arm stretched all the way to the ceiling.
Oh.
And he realized all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I think the bubble gum has come into my body and turned me stretchy. I'm stretchy man. And he stood up and he looked at the door like it was 20 feet away, and he reached his arm and it stretched all the way to the door. And it got skinny, but then it went and came back normal. And that is how Stretchy Man was born. He just ate way too much bubble gum and turned all stretchy. So don't you go eating a bunch of bubble gum. You understand?
Okay.
You understand me? All right, the end.